Let's start with MS Now White House reporter Akayla Gardner, BBC U.S. Special Correspondent and MS Now contributor Katy Kay, and British commentator and royal watcher Hilary Fordwich. So, Akayla, walk us through what we'll see today and what security is like now in the wake of Saturday's attempted attack.
Well, in just about half an hour from now, we're going to see an elaborate welcome ceremony here on the White House South Lawn. We understand that there will be many different branches of the military that will be making performance. There's over 200 performers today in general. Both the King and the Queen and President Trump will meet one another's delegations. But the big thing on the schedule today is, of course, the joint address that King Charles is going to be delivering to Congress. This is probably the most substance that we'll see out of that trip. And as you laid out, there is so much tension between the U.S. and the U.K. That special relationship is frankly at a historic low point. Many of the events today are closed press, but the state dinner later tonight will be open press, as well as an education event with the First Lady and the Queen. And there have been minor adjustments to security after the scare at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, but we're told that this visit will mostly continue as planned.
Now, we do see a big setup there, umbrellas and all, given the weather is a little shifty right now. Katy, given the backdrop of the Iran war, the tensions with NATO, the Epstein files, will this visit be more fraught than past visits by a British monarch?
Look, I think there is a recognition that this isn't just a ceremonial visit, not just a celebration of the special relationship, but it's an attempt to repair the relationships. I made a list of all of the things that are troubling the relationship at the moment, Anna, and it's pretty long. You've got Iran, tariffs, Greenland, the Falklands sovereignty, NATO, taxes on American tech firms, Jeffrey Epstein and Andrew, Jeffrey Epstein and the former ambassador, the issue of Diego Garcia. I mean, it's hard to find great bright spots at the moment between the two countries, and the hoping is that the monarch, who is apolitical and who is much beloved by President Trump, can come here and do something to smooth things over and try to move things a little bit forward.
Hilary, what kind of relationship does President Trump have with King Charles up to this point? And typically, how much could it matter to the overall U.S.-UK relationship?
Well, Anna, it's actually a rather good relationship because King Charles was wise, compassionate and considerate and thoughtful that when President Trump wasn't in office, before he was re-elected, King Charles did maintain a penship relationship with the King, with President Trump. So I think that was really very good move on his part. And I know that President Trump definitely appreciated that. Also, of course, President Trump, one of his earliest memories was being a little boy on his mother's knee and watching the coronation. Of course, his mother was from Scotland. So it's very important that they do have this particular bond, this special bond between the two of them. And also something that hasn't been mentioned much is actually that Queen Camilla, before she became queen, she actually has a relationship, a very good friendship with Scott Bessent and his partner. Of course, he's a gay gentleman, and the two of them have maintained this great relationship. So I think you might have some whisperings from Scott Bessent into the ear of Queen Camilla and vice versa. So I think in the background, that's going to play a part as well. And both nations, it's mutually beneficial for both of us to have each other as the special relationship and the special ally.
Of course, the American audience here knows President Trump, how he can be so unpredictable. He's not one to hold back punches or throwing barbs. Does the king go into this thinking, my goal is to alleviate some of the tension, repair the country's relationship, or does he go in with a king's mentality of Trump has to win me over?
Well, actually, that's actually a misconception about kings. And in fact, even the no kings protests here were rather ludicrous, because if President Trump had been a king, he could have just opened the government and they had them during their shutdowns, which was ludicrous. A king is a constitutional monarchy. So the king is not head of government. The king does not have that kind of attitude, actually, with anything at all, ever since Runnymede in the Magna Carta. So no, that was centuries ago. So no, I think that King Charles definitely is coming in a conciliatory mode. He's a very compassionate man, a very caring man. He cares about his nation, about the Commonwealth, and actually indeed about the entire world. So I think he's coming with an open heart and an open gesture here to want to bring the two nations back together. And I hope it works for both sides of the Atlantic.
Kayla, these interactions with the British royals are always highly choreographed. There's all the proper etiquette, which could butt up against Trump's more off-the-cuff style. What do we know about preparations for this aspect of the dynamics here? Will Trump try to stay on script?
Well, back in 2018, the president actually was seen walking ahead of then Queen Elizabeth, which does not follow typical protocol. But speaking to diplomats ahead of today's meeting, one thing that they were really concerned about was that bilateral meeting between King Charles and President Trump. That meeting right now is closed press, and I think that's notable because that's not normally the case. There's usually at least a brief pool spray, but we've seen the president really put leaders in awkward situations sometimes in that Oval Office meeting. And so it seems that they're taking that precaution to make sure that this meeting is closed press so that the president can't subject the king to potentially sometimes an hour-long worth of questions.
Caddy, King Charles comes with a message for the American lawmakers, at least perhaps directed to the American people at large. He's going to have a speech to Congress today. Should we expect him to wade into politics at all? What are the expectations?
Yeah, only the second monarch ever to make a joint address to Congress. I would be very surprised if the politics was overt. Anna, that is not what the king does. He's here, as we've been saying, to try and repair relationships, and any kind of overt critique of America at this moment obviously wouldn't do that. I think I'm not fluent in royal speak, but my understanding is that it's going to be a pretty coded message. It will be diplomatic, but there'll also be talk about partnerships. When he talks about partnerships, he's referring in some ways to the strain on the partnership. There'll be talk about NATO and the need to enhance NATO and the value of NATO. So he'll address some of the issues that are between the two countries, but I think he's going to do so, it looks like, in this quite veiled diplomatic language that won't be taken as an overt criticism of the United States, but will also not try to completely ignore the fact that there are these strained relationships and point to the future. I think whenever he talks about partnership or cooperation, that is a kind of request for us to get over these difficulties that are in the relationship and for America to resume its traditional role of working with Western allies in a way that it hasn't done particularly well over the last couple of years.
There's also the Epstein elephant in the room. The king's disgraced younger brother, formerly known as Prince Andrew, was stripped of his royal title. He's under criminal investigation over his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. Kayla, Epstein survivors had wanted to meet with King Charles on this trip, but he has declined. What went into that decision? Do we know?
One of the reasons that we've been told is because of that ongoing criminal investigation into Andrew over allegations that he provided confidential information to Jeffrey Epstein when he was serving as trade envoy. But one of the reasons why this decision is so notable is because Queen Camilla has really been open that she's been a survivor of sexual assault herself, and she has made large donations to charities supporting survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. So this decision is really significant for that reason.
Hillary, pick up on that angle, considering Queen Camilla's philanthropy on behalf of survivors of domestic violence and sex assault. How has she navigated the Epstein controversy, and where does she fit in all of this?
Well, that's a very good question. It's a very tight needle to thread, really, for her. She has been very outspoken and very compassionate, of course, with all victims of all sorts of domestic violence in particular. So this is close to her heart, and she's done a lot in that regard. So there are lots of legal issues where also many of the victims don't want to be public, and they've gone on with their future lives. And of course, many of them were involved in recruiting others. So it's a very fraught issue. It's very painful for many people. And I think that the Queen has just stood steadfast, worked with those victims of violent crime, and literally had to defer to the legal process to see what will be undertaken in terms of for the victims and those that do want to come forward and those that do want to speak. Now is not the time for that. I think during this trip, this is more about our long-standing relationship at a global level. But I think those victims, obviously, we need to have a lot of compassion for them and for their privacy.